Thank you for joining me for another quick hits conversation. Today, I would like to talk about how do you know when you're listening, or how can you tell when you're listening? Tim, kick us off.
Okay, so I've got like 4 elements of listening that I want to introduce us to help us sort of break this down a bit. Because I think listening's much more than just listening. And I think we call it listening, but we don't really know what we're talking about. And those 4 elements start off with, the first one is listening. So has the sound reached my ear? Is the sound there? And then the next one is hearing. So has the sound gone through the membrane and actually been heard? Because often some people just don't hear for whatever reason. You know, the old storyline of partners not hearing the other partner. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. What did you say? So have we heard it? Have we actually heard it? Then the third element is, do we understand what we're hearing? So have we fully understood what's been said? And then for me, the most important part, and I think this will be a key element of the conversation here, the 4th part, which is to respond accordingly. So, if somebody says to you, oh, I've had a brilliant day, and you sort of go, that's terrible, then something's gone wrong, hasn't it? We've had a breakdown in our listening piece. So I think for me, those 4 elements are really key. So we know we're listening when we respond accordingly.
Those are very similar to the ideas that I introduce in my book, my conflict resolution book, which is and the understanding piece. And I encourage people, when rather than saying you're not listening to me, maybe what they mean is you don't understand what I'm saying. So is that part of listening, is making sure you can reflect back that you understand?
See, for me, I tend to keep the 2 separate. For me, I think listening and understanding are 2 separate things. You can listen and totally misunderstand what somebody means. So for me, and this idea has literally just dawned on me since Tim was talking. So for me, I think listening is more about the different elements that you're listening to. So you're listening to the actual sort of what the words that are being said and what their apparent meaning is. Then you could be listening to the subtext beneath that. You could be listening to, that sort of slightly deeper meaning. What are they trying to insinuate, or what are they, is there some sarcasm in there, even in a more literal sense? Is there a different meaning to to the words that are being said? And then there's listening to things like tone and body language and mannerisms and that kind of thing. So all of that, for me, would then lead to a better understanding of what the person is trying to communicate. So for me, I think that's the listening aspect, is those different component parts.
Interesting.
And you've all gone so much more profoundly into what is listening. And I strictly went to, how do I know when I'm listening? How do I know when I'm tuned into what they're saying? Because I think all of those elements are about adequate and proper and reasonable communication. You have to do all of those things to be communicating, the body language, the all of it. I know I'm listening when I engage in the conversation. I know that I'm not adequately listening when I find I'm not engaging, because I even go against conventional wisdom that interrupting means you're not listening, because I think in a lot of healthy ways, overlapping in conversation is a proof that you are paying very dear attention and you want to be a part of that engagement. So
yeah, that's a really, really good point. I love that. The idea of interrupting can be considered hugely rude by some, can't it? It's sort of, however, you're right. Interrupting is, I'm so engaged, I just got to blurt. And so therefore I am listening. In fact, I'm so engaged that I think that's, there's a fine line, isn't there? Do you understand that? I love that. That's really cool.
Well, and I know that
goes to what, I think that goes to what Karina said about, are you paying attention to all the signals? Because if I'm interrupting so that I can be the next person to talk, I'm probably not listening well. But if I'm jumping in like I just did at the same time that Robyn did, I'm not interrupting, but I am engaging quickly because I'm so excited.
Do you think there's an element of listening that is forgiveness?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
I where that would work.
If somebody was to say to you something and you're like, oh, I didn't like that, but I must forgive them in order for this conversation to keep going, or maybe they didn't mean it. Is there an element of forgiveness in listening?
That's not what I thought you meant.
Oh, well, go on, say what you thought I meant.
I thought you meant that, because we were talking about interrupting, if there was an element of forgiving people for interrupting. Because
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
For me, being from a really large family, asides are a normal part of a conversation. So you might be talking and I may say something that's like an insert, like this little piece of data, but I don't expect you to stop talking. Keep talking. I'm listening. I'm just inserting this little thing. And I find that people who aren't comfortable with that either forgive me for it or they'll stop talking and be like, I'm sorry, were you saying something? No, it was just this side. Keep going.
So yeah, my explanation was wrong. It was probably not clear. That's exactly what I meant. Was that in listening there is an element of got to be an element of forgiveness for the conversation to flow.
But then I heard it differently, and I thought forgiveness as an accepting. And sometimes when you listen, even when you don't like what you're hearing, your act of listening is accepting them for what they're putting on the table, even if you're not in agreement or it makes you uncomfortable.
Interesting.
I'm going to throw the cat amongst the pigeons a little bit, play devil's advocate. So I think for me, I agree. I think that jumping in with a point demonstrates that you have been listening up to that point. But it's been proven many times that the brain cannot do two things at once. If you're talking or typing or writing or whatever, you're not listening. So because you just can't, it's just not physically possible for you to do. You can half listen and vaguely gauge what the person's now saying, but you're not really, for me, that would be an indication that I'm not listening anymore. And I know, I mean, as a coach, I do occasionally scribble notes down, and usually it's just keywords, because if I go into any more depth than that at the time, I will lose track of what the client is saying at that time, because I can't do both.
And I think, there's a flip side to this question is, how do you know when you're not listening? And, I know I'm not listening when I find if I'm talking to my kids and I pick up my phone and there's a text and I start to respond to it, the language to my kids becomes gibberish. And they'll, I did it this morning, and I said something about drama, and I picked up my phone, I was talking, and I used the word drama, and they were like, "What are you talking about, Dad?" And I was like, "Well," and that's what I was typing in my message. So I knew I clearly wasn't listening to them, and my conversation had fallen apart. So I think, there's an element also of, I guess, of distraction. So good listening is when I'm focused and concentrating, as we said earlier in this conversation, when I am engaged.
Yeah. I think to that point is the same reason I cannot listen to music, like songs that have words in them, if I'm trying to write or have a conversation, or I can't even have a TV on. If there is other language in the space, I can't listen effectively.
Yeah.
And I know I'm not listening when I'm formulating how I'm going to respond. And sometimes that happens with clients, and it's totally incorrect on my part. When I feel like they're going in the same direction they've gone several times, and they're going down this rabbit hole. So I start to formulate how I'm going to get them out of this rabbit hole, and I've stopped listening to what they're saying inside the rabbit hole. And so when I realize I'm formulating the solution, I'm not actually listening the way I should be.
And sometimes, I've been in that situation. I'll often say, "Look, can you give me a second? This is a bit complex. I need to work it through." And they're like, "Yeah, fine, no problem." And it does add to the mystique of the conversation, doesn't it? If they're sitting there waiting for you to find, wow, that's really interesting. And more engagement occurs at that point, doesn't it? This person's so engaged, they've had to stop to think.
And to Karina's point, when I have to take notes because I do not want to forget something, I say to them, "Okay, hold, we're writing this one down," or "Let's stop." Because I know I'm listening then, because I don't want to miss anything, but I also don't want to not retain it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I've had a client say to me when I was writing notes and listening at the same time, they stopped talking and said, "You're not engaged. You're not paying attention." I was like, no, I'm writing notes. I am paying attention. So I think that's a good point to, let someone know where you are, especially on Zoom, because it's on Zoom. If I look down like this and it looks like I'm not paying attention, when in reality, I'm just writing notes. So yeah.
I guess that brings in that sort of broader meaning of the word listening, in terms of, if listening were to mean more than just the audible stuff, and it is to do with just picking up on what the person is communicating, then we are also communicating at all times, aren't we? Like you say, if you've got your phone, even if your phone's in your hand and you are listening and looking and paying attention, you're sending, like Simon Sinek says this in a couple of videos on YouTube, but it says, you are sending the signal that at the minute someone calls, I'm ready to pick up the phone. So if you put the phone out of sight, it's in your bag, it's out of the way, the message is, I'm all yours. What do you need? So everything is always a means of communication. So I guess the other person, even though they are talking, is also in some ways listening, because they're picking up on whatever cues we're putting out there.
Well, that is our 10 minutes, so I'm going to have to cut off our conversation on listening. I know it went by so fast. Thank you for having this conversation with me. I look forward to having another one with you all very soon.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
Robyn.
Robyn.